thank you very much for joining us. Episode 4 of the Security Consultant Insights series. My name's Chris Cubbage. I'm the Executive Editor for My Security Media, and you should see my slide here coming over. So we cover off on aerospace and space, defence and national security, cybersecurity and critical technology. There we are. We're live. Thank you. And cities and infrastructure. So again, this particular one, we're going to look at future directions for smart connected buildings, precincts and cities. So obviously this touches on our critical technology, cities and infrastructure aspects as well. And just for the GoToWebinar audience, I've started doing some live streaming as well. So Tuesdays and Fridays will likely be on LinkedIn, YouTube and Facebook, just to do some moderated Q&As. From the GoToWebinar platform, there will be certificates of attendance. So if you've been with us for at least the 4 episodes, but at least 1 or 2 of the episodes, you should get a certificate in the next week or 2 from the system automatically, which will give you a certificate of attendance. And if you're an ASIS member or the like, you can use that for CPE points, I'm sure. Today, we'll go for at least half an hour, I'm sure, but we'll close it off after about 60 minutes. And I'd like to welcome our panel. We've got Dr. Kevin Foster. Kevin in Perth, there you are. Dr. David Brooks, also in Perth. And I'm going to bring up Richard Cathage is next. He's also in Perth. So 3 from Perth. Then we've got Fraser Holmes in Melbourne, and Rachel, you're in Melbourne too, aren't you?
Melbourne, yes.
Yeah, Melbourne. So Rachel and Fraser in Melbourne, and Mark Jarrett in representing Tasmania today.
Yes, in Launceston, or Launceston as the British say.
Thank you very much. And I'm in Sydney, and Sarah sends her apologies today. Short notice commitment came up. Okay, let me just keep going. I just did an episode this morning. I'm not going to go too much into details here, but I had Doc Watson, Colonel Doc Watson, the Director from the Joint Cyber Directorate on the Information Warfare Division, talking about the ADF Cyber Skills Challenge. Very interesting if you're in this space and thinking about moving into cyber. They've got a lot of opportunities there for you to kind of get into the defence aspect. And then Nick Harlow, the Senior Director, Product Management with HackerOne, looking at the 2021 outlooks. He's based in San Francisco Bay Area. So that's live on YouTube, and the recording, edited version will be up shortly. I thought I'd highlight this. This is a campaign, if you haven't heard, out of ASIO, the Australian Security Intelligence Organisation. Mike Burgess there, Think Before You Link, just in terms of a foreign interference campaign. I don't know if you've actually looked at the ASIO website, but there is some awareness materials that you can use both as a security professional, but also within your organisation that you can put out. So worth having a look as well. So look, that's it. If you want to catch up on news and events, go to our YouTube channel or mysec.tv, and those episodes are there, and I run through what's going on. I didn't want to waste too much time talking today. Let me just test. I always forget which slide's next. Okay, so this series is sponsored by, that's why I had that up there, AMS Australia. So thank you to AMS and their self-latching monitoring box. They pretty much instigated the whole series. And for the audience that are in early, which is the majority of you, we're going to do a bit of a giveaway. So post this series, I haven't worked out exactly, but we're going to have 1 or 2 Australian standards sort of giveaway aspect. I've checked with Australian standards, we can kind of offer it. AMS Australia will cover the costs. So I welcome some feedback on what standards you might like to see. I think things like simple ones like wiring rules or electronic security standards, and I think the electronic fire door standards was some there that we can do. But if you're after a particular type of standard and you'd like to sort of put that in the running, let me know, and that'll be a sort of a thank you for attending this series. The videos are available if you're interested in this door hardware, and also AMS Australia have a page with inquiry forms on the marketplace. So look, this is an open session. It's an open discussion, and I welcome questions from the audience. If you've got some questions, welcome to fire it out. I'm going to start off on the technical preferences We talked about future directions for smart connected buildings, precincts and cities. The reason I started with just doing buildings, but then I thought, well, if it's a smart building, you're then going to want to connect it. Most Australian capitals now have sort of smart city strategies underway, and if you deal with any universities and the like, they sort of operate in a precinct type format. So whether it's a smart building, which means it might be sitting within a smart precinct, which means it's be connected to a smart city. That's the idea. It's actually making it happen is easier said than done. So we should be able to just see all of us here. So let me open it up to the panel. Future directions, what kind of trends and where do you see some of this going? And try not to look backwards and go, oh, when I started 30 years ago. Yeah, maybe what are the current trends that you're seeing now in the context of security, the safety and security balance within sort of smart connected areas as well? Anyone wanted to sort of kick off? Raise your hand if you can. Fraser? I'll go Dave.
Don't surprise, Chris. I suppose the obvious one is open protocol connectivity, divergence of technologies and platforms, which as security professionals we certainly have to embrace, whether we like it or not. And the talk about trying to achieve air gaps, I think, is we're going to just shoot ourselves in the foot. So how we manage that, which is manageable, well, I'm sure we'll discuss later on this morning. I won't say any more. I'll let someone else talk.
Yeah, just jump in for the panel if you've got some areas just in the current trends that you're currently seeing.
Chris, I'll just sort of make a comment on where I see the technology developing in the future, and based on some of the things that have happened in the past, especially in Asian intelligent buildings, which are some of the most advanced in the world. Some of the things that are happening in the intelligent building area are really totally integrating security with other systems in the building, not just the building services, but the office automation systems, so that people can book a visitor into the car park just from their own PC sitting on their desk, that sort of thing. But also being able to order food from the cafe in the building through fully networked systems, and this is now happening in some intelligent buildings quite well. I've seen in Asian intelligent buildings where people have been arrested completely automatically within a building. It's not actually legal in Australia, but it is in some Asian countries where you can actually entrap an intruder, lock all the doors around them. For example, if they're in a lift lobby where they shouldn't be, you can lock all the doors once they're detected, and then you can organise a response force to come and get them. So there's some really clever stuff happening, and I think that we're going to see a lot more of that kind of stuff in the future.
Yeah, we just covered the story with Cone on the lifts. You can now order the lift on an application from your device as well. Rachel?
Thanks, Chris. I was just going to jump in and say one thing that I'm definitely seeing is requests for greater integration and to support those functions that Kevin was just talking about. You need really cohesive integrations between systems. But in order to facilitate that, you need to pre-identify what those systems are going to be to make sure that they will all talk to one another. And security systems historically have been very closed so that they don't have any integration, so that they don't create vulnerabilities. So I find that to be quite a challenge, is getting that identification clear at the start and making sure that those systems will be able to speak to each other to achieve the desired outcomes.
Do you think, I'm going to come back, I'll go Fraser.
That's okay. You can go first. I'll come back to me afterwards.
Well, my question was, do you think it's challenging or stretching the skill set from a security consultant's perspective? So I do a lot with CCTV, which means you need to be a lighting specialist. And then once you've become integrated, you're dealing with sort of power, like solar, you become solar sort of specialist. And, in a building, as kind of Kevin said, now you need to be sort of an application specialist as well. If it's connected and it's smart, it's going to be run through an application, which means application security becomes an issue, and then also cyber security in the way that code is, the risk profile maybe is changing. So yeah, the skill set and the challenges of maintaining a skill set as technology sort of drives and connects itself, or wants to.
I think it's important for security consultants to be part of a team. Security consultants don't need to do all of these things themselves, but they need to understand how to pull a team together, or to be part of a team that does this. You know, you need your IT specialists, you need your fire engineers, you need other engineers involved, air conditioning engineers, and so on and so forth. And security consultants need to be part of that team. It's absolutely essential. And we don't need to know everything, but we need to know how things come together.
Fraser?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with what Kevin was saying, but also with what Dave was mentioning to begin with. I think the landscape has changed quite a lot, in that everything is IT based, and whether a security professional likes it or not, eventually, realistically, that's the way that things will go. So we need to embrace that and understand the challenges and the implications it has, not only for us providing a service for our clients, but also with an understanding of the types of systems that may be integrated and may need to be integrated. And I remember, and this is probably showing my age a bit, but I remember working with Kevin, it would have to be about 25 years ago now. And I remember back then Kevin telling me about a building in Asia that was an intelligent building. And some of the aspects and some of the technology and the ideas that he was putting in that building back then are still not really evident in all the buildings that we are looking at and we can see today. I mean, certainly COVID has changed things a lot, and I see a lot of our clients wanting frictionless access control, as they call it, or seamless integration with destination control systems for the lifts and things like that. But in reality, that was all the things that Kevin was talking about 25 years ago. So I think we still have a long way to go, but also as security professionals, we need to also be able to embrace those changes in technology and not, I guess, that we know about everything as well ourselves.
I'm going to come to... So go, Kevin.
Sorry, Chris, that particular building that Fraser just mentioned was called POSBank building. It was a headquarters for a Singaporean bank. Yeah, 52-story building, which was a high security building. But the aim of the project was for it to be the most intelligent building in the world, to develop a number of inventions that would go into it that would be completely unique. And it certainly was. Indeed, we had quite a substantial research budget built into the contract, so that the intelligent building contractors, who the main intelligent building contractor was a Japanese company, actually developed technology specifically for that building. So it was quite a challenge. I actually did my PhD on the building project. And so it was by far the most advanced building in the world at the time. Some other buildings in Asia copied the concept. And I agree with Fraser.
How would you rate the where it is today? I mean, if that was sort of 20 years ago or thereabouts, how would you rate the technology today? Because this has come up before. You can't build a building today on today's technology because it takes 10 years to build a building, sometimes, or 5 years maybe. In that 5 years, the technology changes. Oh, there you are.
The approach that we took, Chris, is to look ahead. We didn't specify systems that were available today. We specified systems that we thought were going to be available at the time the building opened, which was a challenge for some of the tenderers, but we were also confident that the technologies, when they came on board, would be cheaper than the technologies available today. So we weren't too concerned about the costs. So the biggest challenge was for the tenderers and to really understand what we wanted, and then to implement it. It did actually work pretty well. I'd say in terms of function, that particular design was probably still still today, if it was built today, would be the most advanced building in the world still. But of course, the integration technologies are much better now than they were. That building was intended to open in the year 2000 and was intended to reflect. It was intended to reflect Singapore's advancement in the 20th century, and also to symbolise the start of the 21st century, which is why it had a huge symbolic significance. As it turned out, the building was sold to somebody else when it opened, but so it's not actually well known as the most intelligent building in the world, but it certainly was on the day that it opened.
It sort of came up today when I was interviewing Defence in their cyber capability. You know, the integration and the networks that we're seeing today. It's not like building a tank or buying a tank or a ship. Or a building is a 50-year investment, and so it has to be able to be adaptable, both from a technology viewpoint and also users and owners will change in that period. Let me bring Richard in, I think, who might talk more on the fire safety and the safety aspect. Richard, the trends that you're seeing in this domain of connect, and we do have a question from the audience, and I'll bring that in shortly. But Richard, yeah, what you're seeing on the fire domain and fire technology, detection or response?
Yeah, so typically fire is a bit slower to uptake new technologies. That's because we're pretty strong on reliability, so it takes a bit of time to get there. One item we've seen a big increase in is dynamic signage, so exit signs that can adapt for the situation. So, for example, if you want occupants to go a certain part of the building to exit the building, the signs can direct them. So we've seen a big uptake in that. I guess there was a question a couple of weeks ago about the CCTV and using that for smoke detection. That technology is being developed, but we really haven't seen much of it in the built environment space. I have to say the big one we've seen is the uptake of dynamic signage.
Fair enough. And I imagine access as well, like movable bollards and automatic bollard movements and those types of things, which used to be very expensive but are now somewhat standard. Let me bring in the audience. We've got a question. Are you seeing a trend for greenfield sites whereby anything that is connected to the building IT network is treated seriously under cybersecurity and not simply solutions that are managed by the electrical contractor driving to the lowest dollar and dismissing this serious subject? So greenfield sites, Fraser, you might have a greenfield site. We don't have to identify it, but how do you see that from your perspective, the disciplines being brought in? Do you think IT network security is being taken seriously, or do you think this was driven by an electrical contractor?
From my experience, and yes, thanks, there is a project at the moment that's working along the lines of that, and it's a precinct-wide development that's occurring that involves a lot of different stakeholders, and that includes state government, industries, emergency services, law enforcement, architectural, landscaping engineers, building services engineers. So it is involving a lot of different groups. But what I do see is that, fortunately, the cyber and the ICT aspects of the security requirements are taken very seriously. I think a lot of the time they're taken far more seriously than the physical security and the electronic security requirements. So I know from my own discussions I've had with security managers or CISOs, the CISOs seem to get the security and understand the importance of it far more than maybe a physical security manager, where they're kind of looking at things maybe a bit more two-dimensionally rather than trying to have a look at the overall development, the overall applications and the ongoing management of those areas as well.
Yep. In that context, Mark, from the SCEC sort of viewpoint as well, we talked about sort of just pre-session, I'm seeing a lot of precincts for defence. So we're seeing this in Adelaide and places in Queensland, and I think they're probably doing it here in New South Wales as well. There's a question here. High security buildings don't usually like high risk technologies. any strategies to bring the client along to accept new technologies. And again, we talked to the A3C, the Australian Cyber Collaboration Centre, Hytran, the CEO there, and they've got space, they've got defence, they've got cyber, they've got academics, and industry all coming together, but there's still clearance and zones there. You see sort of, how do you see the client looking at these and starting to adopt new partnerships and new technologies?
Yes, well, again, pardon the quality of my audio, but certainly the Internet of Things and the Internet interconnected nature of devices in smart buildings create, of course, an external attack vector or route in, and that needs to be managed very well, especially with remote dial-in access, which we see for commercial grade alarm system maintenance and access to CCTV images and related issues like that. Certainly, though, the ASIO Type 1A security alarm system implementation and operations guide is very strict, and the specifications are very strict about still maintaining that segregation so that you can't access those systems unless you're actually within the protected secure zone. All of the field panels and disarm pads, etc., have to be wholly and solely protected and contained within those secure areas.
I suppose what you're saying is the same principles apply, but you just have to bring it on face value. Fraser, you had something to say?
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, I was just going to add with what Mark had mentioned there, the importance of not only looking at the external vectors or threat vectors coming in from a cyber point of view, but also the need to look at the trusted insider and the local environment. So if you spend all of your time and all your efforts and money on looking at the cyber aspects of the threats, and you forget about the physical implementation of racks, cabinets, doors, rooms, and the like, policies, procedures, then we're kind of failing in some of those areas. So we really need to make sure that we not only look at the external threats from a cyber point of view, but also how we physically protect the equipment that is housed and stored in those areas as well.
Do you think a data centre is a good...
Sorry, yes, Fraser, totally agree. Just because buildings are smart and they might have layered and interconnected systems, it's no reason to ignore defence in depth or security in depth, including, of course, control, audit, and oversight and supervision of trusted insiders who still remain usually the most likely threat source because they know your operations, your assets, your functions, and where all the gold bullion or whatever you have is kept.
Yep. Do you think, I was going to ask, do you think data center design is a good kind of model to go by, connecting sort of the networks through to the building security, how they approach data centers now?
I can say some words on that if you like.
Yeah, go Fraser, particularly in the defence in depth and how the different zones are sort of carried through.
I guess data centers are a good illustration of that. The important part for a data center is not only looking at the data halls themselves, but whether or not they're co-located data halls. So if you have a single client in a data hall, it's far easier to manage and secure that area than having a co-located data hall. If you have a colo data hall, then you look at the aggregated amount of data and information that's being stored in there and the level, if it's a classified nature, the level of classification alongside of that aggregated data value, and that will dictate a lot of the requirements that are needed for separation and segregation of areas in a data hall. But generally a data center does provide a good illustration of defense in depth, square onion diagram, rings of security, whatever we want to call it, showing that they are using technology, they're using management practices and procedures, and they're using physical security methodologies as well. And then they have their compliance, whether they're complying with TIA or any other certification bodies that they're looking to comply with.
The reason I Mark.
So I totally agree with that observation, Fraser, and consistent with data centre projects that we have worked on together, you may need to take your defence in depth concept within the actual data pool by using SCEC endorsed racks, restricted profile keying, strict supervision and control over access to the racks and the arrows, etc. within those, and of course the associated cabling, cable protection, and all the logical and physical controls.
Yep. The reason I started with a data center is because obviously that's where the data of a connected city, you're going to have multiple data centers around the city. They're going to be sitting within different precincts around as well. And it's obviously a good example of sort of an integrated building design that are often leading edge in terms of their design and application. With the types of technology being applied, we're seeing in New South Wales, and I don't know how it is with other states, but Service New South Wales and the use of the app, they've now gone with a digital driver's license, and they're now taking it to the next level where you can move around Sydney. As long as you've got the app installed, you can start to get some discounts on food sort of vouchers and the like. And no doubt, you know, there's other sort of services that you can start to access. Is this what you would expect, where you could potentially start to bring in both identification opportunities and then also building access and service opportunities in a smart city? Is that where you imagine this is going to be going, and then how that might apply to a smart building or a university or the library or something like that? Any concepts there and the potential vulnerabilities in that?
A lot of potential vulnerabilities in that.
Yeah. Any come to mind immediately, Rachel?
Well, just privacy concerns first and foremost. You're basically giving an external party or government authority permission to track your whereabouts at any time. Now, a lot of people will say that Facebook already does that, and so does Google, and various other things that we all use on a daily basis. But I think the likelihood of it being misused by our own government is probably a little bit higher, or not misused, but the data being interrogated and used in ways that we're not across would be higher if it's low.
I don't know about you, but I'm finding COVID-19 is changing the concept of privacy by demand. You can't go to a restaurant unless you're giving over your personal details. So those days are gone. Fraser, you had a comment in that regard?
Yeah, I was just going to mention something to do with the storage of that information as well. So whether or not it's either an on-prem or a cloud type storage, if it's a cloud type storage, then we need to look at the location of where that storage actually is. So I had a discussion not long ago with someone, and they went, "Oh, we're just connected to the cloud." I said, "Well, where do you think the cloud is?" It is a physical location. It doesn't just sit around there in the ether somewhere. There's a physical location where this data and information is being stored, and depending on the country that you reside in or you're servicing, then there could be sovereignty issues associated with that as well. So it does become very complicated. Doesn't mean it's insurmountable. It just means that we need to carefully consider each of those requirements that are associated with that.
Kevin, you mentioned the multidisciplinary team. Where does the security consultant, because you all represent sort of different companies, different sizes as well, where do you see the security consultant sitting amongst that? Is it, from your perspective, you're designing on the physical security systems, you're applying defence in depth, and then you're going to have to hand over to a cyber security professional or engineer to look at that risk profile? How do you bring it all together, and maybe how did you address some of this in Handbook 188?
Yeah, I guess the first thing to understand is what a security consultant actually is. And
yeah, it's a fair question.
you know, it's a pretty broad group of people. You know, some security consultants are selling security screen doors. Others are the people in this panel who are at the top end of the market doing you know, all sorts of amazing things. But even at the top end, each of us have a different set of skills. So some of us are coming from a risk management background, perhaps, or an operational background. Some of us are coming from an engineering background. Some of us are coming from a military or policing background. So we have such a broad range of skills as security consultants. So how we manage this really depends to some extent on where we plug in. And it may be that we need multiple security consultants involved with all these different skill sets. Yeah. And that's really important. So I think teamwork is really the key. So we need to, as security consultants, we need to learn to become project leaders, and we need to start bringing teams together. So on most building projects that I've been involved with, especially the bigger ones, you know, I've been leading teams that include engineer. I'm an electronics engineer, but also happen to be a risk management specialist. So those are my two skills. But often I have a structural engineer on my team who deals with building resilience issues and blast protection issues and the like. I have an air conditioning guy on the team who's really got to make sure that I haven't got any vulnerabilities through the air conditioning system, and that everything is, especially in a high security building where we've got grills inside of air conditioning ducts and things like that we need to think about. We've got electrical engineers. Sometimes as security consultants, we think that, you know, we don't need the electrical engineers. We do. Electrical engineers are not the enemy. They're an integral part of the team. My background is electrical and electronic engineering. And we've got to make sure that we bring these guys into the team because they're the ones that are going to help us make it work. The electronics engineers are extremely important. The lighting engineers were mentioned earlier, the lighting specialists, you know, not necessarily engineers, but they might be lighting designers of some kind. We've got to get the architects involved in buildings. You know, I mean, they're the primary designers of the building. And if we get the architects to get involved in the security design really early on, as I mentioned in my HB 188 presentation, then they're going to get the layout of the building suitable for security purposes right up front during the concept stage. So as security consultants, we've got to learn to be more proactive, I think, rather than just being reactive. I think in previous sessions, we talked about the scope of work of the security consultant, and sometimes we're just told, you know, come in and, you know, specify the access control system or the CCTV system or whatever. But I think we as the better security consultants need to get in early, and we do that through influencing the architects and the builders and the developers. And one thing that I always did through my career was to just offer to sit down with a developer or an architect at the beginning of their project, didn't charge them a penny, and just said, look, these are the things you need to think about if you want to have a federal government agency in your building, or if you want to have a bank in your building. And that's really important. And that conversation might take 15 or 20 minutes, but it helps to set the scene for a developer or an architect so they've got something to think about. The work always came back to me later on. You know, so it's useful.
15 minutes,
it's
but
really
yeah,
useful.
expect the deal. Now, David, sorry, Kevin.
That's right. So I was going to say. So I think that's important. So I think my message there is, as a consultant, you've got to be proactive in getting involved as early as you possibly can before you've got the order in your hand, and so that you can influence what happens. And then you've got to be a project leader to help manage a team of multidisciplinary experts.
I had a question for David and it just disappeared just as I was going to bring in from his perspective in terms of the research going on in this space as well from security science. But maybe another question was also, what training do you think architects are getting in security? I mean, I can't say I've ever presented to a group of architects. I've obviously been engaged by them and dealt with them, but have anyone really gone and spoken to, I don't know, there'd be an architects association or someone like that, and how forthcoming are they, and what type of training would an architect be getting in security? Go, Fraser.
Thanks, Chris. I actually had an experience where I was presenting a SEPTED training course in Malaysia. And the first course I was I was asked to present, I walked into the room and there was literally about 100 architects, town planners, and type of people in the room as well. And I could just see this bored, glassy-eyed look on their face going, what is this guy going to tell us? And I sort of stood there for a second and I said, well, I'm only here really to tell you what you already know and what you already do instinctively. So thinking about architects, thinking about even landscape designers and the like, I said, you instinctively incorporate SEPTED principles into your designs. Whether you know it or not, you already do it. So really all I'm here is to tell you there's a bit of a science and there's a bit of a theory and understanding behind why you do what you instinctively do. And it's probably the best thing I could have said, because after that it went fantastic for the next couple of days.
I'm sure it was just a charm, Fraser, for them to listen.
Oh, thank you. But it was, I guess it highlighted to me that they, you know, other industries and other groups do know a fair bit about security. They may not necessarily call it the same things as what we do, but they can and do have a valued input into some of our work as well.
I suppose where I'm coming from is the mindset. My policing days always taught us to think like the crook, and it makes you a better policeman. Security consultant, what's your mindset other than the defence in depth and just purely focusing on the asset to be protected? Again, from an architect or a landscape designer, they're thinking creatively, and you don't come in from the risk side. What's the mindset of a security consultant in a design or a risk assessment in application? And we'll come back to you, Richard, as well. I'd like to get your thoughts on what mindset you have as a fire engineer. So maybe the security consultants first.
Mark?
Go, Rachel. Go, Rachel.
Okay. I was just going to say, earlier on in my career, someone asked me, what do you need to be a security consultant? And my response was actually quite candid, and it's the mind of a criminal, but the rap sheet of a saint. So you really need to be able to look at a facility and say, right, if I was going to do this place, how would I break in? How would I get in? And it really is looking for those vulnerabilities. And as you gain more and more experience and you come across incidents that have occurred, that level of understanding of what could be exploited, increases. So it's understanding what can happen, how it can be exploited, and really trying to design those things out. I absolutely agree with what Kevin was saying. If you can get in early, you can design out so many of these problems right in the early stages and really save a lot of money and a lot of time.
And they'll design it out for you. I always also find you just highlight, have you thought of this? Have you thought of that? And they will design it out. They will kind of see it's often common sense as well, but with that different mindset. Go, Mark, you had something to offer there?
Yes, just try and summarise the role of a security consultant is saying that our obligation is to provide the client or asset owner with the maximum protection of their personnel, information, equipment, reputation and operational service delivery capability at the most cost-effective and effective manner. And that's drawn out too by other codes of professional conduct and ethics similar to that of ACES International. And certainly in relation to architects, we have found, certainly in ACT chapter of ACES, that there has been some interest from architects, primarily because they want to know how they can meet Australian government high security zone standards, such as those applying to SCEC security zones. So, unlike what Rob Andrews, former instructor at AG's Protective Security Training Centre, said probably about 25 years ago now, architects do not have to be the enemy of security. They want things to look good, they want things to be aesthetically attractive, but that doesn't necessarily conflict with asset protection objectives.
Very good.
I think it's also important to understand that architects are not just about aesthetics. It's really important for an architect to make sure the building works the way it's intended, and so security is part of that function. So every architect I've ever worked with, once they understood what was necessary from a security point of view, they always had good ideas and they always contributed to the security design.
We're starting to see digital twins as well. Definitely down here at Barangaroo, we've got a very impressive digital twin of the Barangaroo Towers, and they can see live on the sort of the 3D version of the building what doors are open and what alarms are going off and the response, even down into the cameras. Fraser, just a moment. I'm just going to get Richard. Richard, from a fire engineer, much like the security consultant's mindset, what's your mindset, would you say, as a fire engineer when you approach a project? Obviously safety, but do you come up from a fire behaviour perspective?
I guess it's trying to work out how things can fail. So trying to test the design to see if it can fail from a fire perspective. So if you put a fire in this building, what are the likely consequences? So you have to worry a lot about how things can fail, and just trying to understand how you can break the building from a fire perspective. And I guess touching on the discussion on architects, there's a lot of parallels from a fire safety perspective. So architects generally form the lead consultant on most projects we work on, and they have a very challenging job in the sense they have to balance a lot of things. And we find that obviously they need to understand the rules too with fire safety. So we need to try and communicate those rules. And I guess even as an example, we had to work on a project with the Spanish architects over the last couple of years, and they obviously weren't very familiar with the building code rules, but we were able to, I guess, effectively teach them those rules, and then they can apply them to their building design, and that made for a much more, I guess, efficient process. Instead of having to go back and forth, they knew the rules pretty well by the end of the process and could apply them in the building. So it's important, just to touch on that architects need to sort of understand what we do and what those sort of rules entail.
Yeah, I suppose a good architect would keeps the consultant's fire engineer's job. You're there just to check off everything's been covered. They should already, hopefully, have done most of it if they've done their job properly, I imagine. Definitely,
like I find the best architects are the ones who could probably do everyone's job quite easily, and that includes structural, mechanical, everything. There's definitely some great architects out there who understand that and definitely apply that.
Great. Fraser?
Thanks, Chris. I was just going to add one thing as well, an experience I had last week in regards to what Kevin was saying about getting in earlier. I'm actually working on a project with I guess, an owner-developer operator of a site, I'll say. And I had a discussion with one of their directors, and we were talking about the importance of getting security involved at the early stage of a project. And she actually shared with me that she'd worked on 2 projects previously where that hadn't happened. They hadn't had whether they had the ability to speak to the security consultant or they just hadn't spoken to them previously. But she was also able to share the impact that had on that project, or on those projects that she had worked on. And she said never again will she ever not include security at the early stages in the planning of a project because of the impact it had on those other projects she was working on. So that, to me, was something that's very, very encouraging, because it doesn't always happen. But it was really encouraging to see that, maybe slowly, the industry is changing, and that we're not always seen as the pain or the enemy trying to do things that are just going to make things difficult for people. But it's the input we provide is actually going to assist them and make their life easier in the end.
Well, it was one of the reasons why we had the concept of this particular series as well. We often, most of us are members of ACES International or a professional body. We go to those meetings and the like. We're often talking to ourselves. I think it's really good to outreach. And again, I remember when I came into the industry, I was always interested to know sort of what security consultants are doing and how I would align myself to best practice, what courses to do, what quals to have, and the like. I've got one more question, and we're going to come into final comments shortly. Are you seeing a trend or desire to use IP video for non-security applications, safety and business intelligence? How important is this to use IP video to branch away from security applications? And again, I actually mentioned this in our pre-session discussion. Video is definitely one that I'm seeing in a lot of my work with cities. Is video is being applied all over the place. It's cheap, it's relatively simple to put in, but it can get expensive. So IP video, yeah, some of the comments around IP video in an IoT connected world, in whether it's a building, precinct or a city. Rachel, I imagine you deal with video quite a bit.
I do, yes. The examples that I have for that are actually not within buildings or cities. In cities, it's rather within infrastructure. And the video surveillance can be also used for health and safety monitoring and detecting. You can set up analytics, for example. Has anyone crossed into this area when we weren't expecting someone to be in there? There was no permit registered, for example. So it can certainly be used in that way to enhance safety at potentially dangerous facilities. And also thermal detection cameras can also be used quite successfully in perimeter detection, where you might have a traditional perimeter intrusion detection system that will be subject to a lot of false alarms, but thermal may not have those same challenges and can be used effectively in that space too.
I think we're starting to see it a lot more. I would imagine COVID would be an applicable, it's more almost a health and occupational safety approach rather than a security approach. It's really the hybrid model of safety and security coming together. It's going to be interesting to see that trend. I suppose, if anything, we're looking at sort of the digital future in this space. The pandemic has definitely changed the way public places are and workplaces are perceived and dealt with for the longer term. Any other takeaways from COVID-19, I suppose, on that topic, and how the pandemic may have changed the approaches to what, for want of a better word, traditional security systems in terms of how they're integrated? Any thinking in that of, yep, that's definitely going to change, or there might be a step back? No, blank looks.
I think there's it's highlighted one thing, Chris, and that's the greater need for us to communicate and collaborate more amongst our project teams, similar to what Kevin was mentioning before. If we look at COVID and the pandemic and the things that have happened and the systems that are being put into place in buildings particularly, it may not be, as you mentioned, for a security aspect, but it can be a health and safety aspect. It could be a facilities management requirement. There could be AV requirements as well. So I think because the cameras can and may be used for so many different purposes, I think it just illustrates the need for us to work collaboratively as a team on the projects that we work on, and not to be seen as a stumbling block in a project team, but we are literally there to help and to provide, I guess, the experience and the value that we can provide in those project teams.
Very good. Well, look, on that note, if there's no further questions from the audience, what I wouldn't mind doing, just as we go around the panel, your most rewarding part of your role, you know, what do you actually enjoy as part of your role, and any key takeaways that you think, if there's sort of more junior or graduating security students listening. So yeah, what do you find the most sort of rewarding part of your role? Which parts do you enjoy? Rachel, you look ready to go.
Oh gosh, I mean, there's so many things that I enjoy about the work that I do. Although my background is heavily in security science and risk, one thing I really enjoy working in building services engineering is seeing how a building and a facility comes together. and just all the different disciplines that are involved and the integrations and you know, the work that has to go in from all parties to make it work well. I find that really fascinating, and yeah, my background didn't expose me to that before I started working in that field.
Yeah.
It constantly amazes me when I drive around the city. I worked on that one and that one and that one. It's really, it's quite satisfying. Yeah.
I think there's an advert like that. Oh, I built that. Kevin?
Yeah, very, very similar for me. I think, you know, I spent most of my career working in the buildings industry, but also in transport and energy to a lesser extent, and aviation. And I think for me, it's just if a major building or infrastructure project is delivered smoothly, everything works well, all the stakeholders are satisfied, and at the end of the day, people celebrate the success of the project. It gives you a huge buzz, and as Rachel said, to see the finished building or piece of infrastructure really is an amazing feeling, to know that you've actually contributed not just to the project but to society as a whole. You know, it is really something that we're all quite privileged to be part of.
It's often thankless too, like, you know, only a bit like the air conditioning guys. They know, they appreciate the aircon's working, but everyone just kind of takes it for granted. Richard, I'm going around in order on my screen, by the way, but Richard, from your perspective?
I guess the big one for me is solving problems and problem solving. So especially the difficult problems. It's great to be able to help solve problems. And coming up with a great solution, and seeing that solution implemented and like everyone said, the building built, and seeing that completed. So for me, it's the problem solving aspect of the project.
And obviously no fires and no false alarms.
Definitely not, no.
Mark, your most rewarding aspect of your role? Sorry, Mark, hang on, go. I thought you were on mute. Hang on. Fraser, in the meantime.
Thanks, Chris. I also agree with Richard. From my own point of view, it's very rewarding to see or have the ability to help our clients solve their problems. From a risk point of view, to firstly identify what their challenges and their problems are, and then come up with solutions to help them to reduce and mitigate those risks, is something that I find quite rewarding. But the other aspect is, as well, as just being able to employ a graduate and actually help them and see them grow and develop in the industry, and then see them become managers and directors of security and the like. To me, that's very rewarding to know that I've had a part in their development and a part in their ability to grow and develop into a successful security manager.
Nice work. Actually, yeah, I'd sort of second that one too. I think that's great to see younger people coming into the into the industry. Mark, we should be able to hear you now. Mark, can you even hear us? Can't hear you. You're not on mute. I don't think. Let me check. Hang on. Sorry, Mark.
Okay, no, that's all right. You're troubling me on and off there. I couldn't work out what was going on. But yeah, certainly in my role as a security consultant since about 2001, the most valuable contribution I think I have been able to make, and that assists people, is to give them a reality check on what the most cost-effective suite of asset protection and business continuity countermeasures they should have and they should implement, because security is seen viewed as quite accessible by most clients, and a lot of them sort of think they know it all. And it may be a challenge to get them a reality check and say, you do not need all those countermeasures to mitigate against rare yet potentially catastrophic issues. You can save them a lot of money by giving them a reality check and saying that this is the most rational approach to give you the most bang for the buck, so to speak.
Very good. Thank you so much. Mine's getting the client when he calls you back. and ready for the next job. So that's always, it's like, okay, well, we've got the last one right. And I think over time, I've got a sort of a list of clients that I've had for about 10 years, and you become their advisor over the longer term. And I find that the most rewarding, which means they trust you and you're doing the right thing. So I think it's been great to have you all. I don't know what happened to David, but he's probably thinking, I'm not coming back on if there's only a few minutes left. But and also to Sarah, thoughts with you, Sarah. And shame we missed you on the last episode, but you can refer back to episode 3 for Sarah. Now, before I finish off, let me just, any final questions from the audience if you've got, you want to come through, but we've had a pretty good attendance rate on these, and particularly for the recorded sessions, you know, they're checking them out. Obviously, people with real jobs, they can't get away midday, but they are definitely watching these, and the feedback I've had has also been very good. Let me just do some closing slides here. Yep, don't want to share my emails. So look, thank you to our panel, and I just wanted to give a sort of a takeaway. This is a takeaway report just came out from, it's a Trend Micro research, but malicious uses and abuses of artificial intelligence exploiting AI. I had it on my last session, but it's worth having a look at. There's a lot of references in the back of this report, just saying probably where the future is going, because it might not be a human threat, it could be a sort of artificial intelligence, machine-driven threat that we need to be up against as well. So thank you to our panelists, Dr. Kevin Foster, Dr. David Brooks. David, I don't know what happened, mate, but you didn't even get a word in. Sarah Trimboli, thank you, Sarah. Fraser Holmes, Rachel DeLuca, Richard Cathage, and Mark Jarrett there from Tasmania. Thank you for joining us. Episode 3, if you haven't, if this was your first session, episode 3 from last week, we had Sarah Trimboli, Dr. David Brooks, and Rachel DeLuca on their presentations. That's available on YouTube, or just go to mysec.tv now, and it's there. And that was it. We had Dr. Kevin Foster and Mark Jarrett on episode 1. We had pretty much the full panel for episode 2, where we ran a discussion, and Richard gave a fire presentation on fire safety, which was very good. So I think overall the 4 episodes come together quite well. And I just want to give a thanks to, I don't know where these slides are going. Here we go. The AMS Australia. These are SCEC endorsed lock door hardware. We've put another 5 products onto the website too. So if you're a security consultant and you're doing building design, well, these are the products to check out. So thank you to AMS Australia for instigating this session. I'm going to close off. Hopefully one of the videos will work. I've been trying it for the last couple of weeks and it didn't work. We're going to close off this session with a video, and I'm going to try for the, we'll try with the 333 self-latching monitoring box, and that way I'll know it's going to work. But thank you to our panel. You're welcome to stay on and watch the video, but otherwise the video will close. Once I'm closed with the video, I'll close the session. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you.
Thanks,
Chris. Shout out. Thank you. Goodbye. Good on you. Okay. Thanks, team. Thank you to our audience. And here's the AMS 333 self-latching monitoring box. In this particular session, we're going to talk about the AMS 333 self-latching monitoring box. This is your personal design. It's patented here in Australia. Talk us through it.
The 333 is designed in particular to encompass issues with dual lock levers handles. And it's a situation where we have a problem in high security applications where they need 2 locks on a security door. Okay. One of the problems that we found, and my background is a locksmith, so we used to fit a lot of these security locks to high security applications around Australia. And one of the issues is when you have 2 locks on a door, as here, which is a security requirement, when the top lock is actually, if the top lock was actually locked, the door wouldn't close. And when you've got a situation where you've got a security door and a fire door, there becomes a clash of these specifications. The security says you must have 2 locks on the door for high-end security applications, we're talking here. But the fire regulations say you can't put a square bolt deadlock on a fire door. So basically what we've designed here is a product. It's actually an automatic self-latching micro switch box. So it's actually a dual function situation. What actually happens is it will take the door with the lock in the thrown position, but it will also monitor that bolt when the door closes.
And this is specifically for a SCEC endorsed building, or that has to meet a SCEC endorsement.
Yep.
But for a fire door to meet the security requirements of that SCEC specification.
Predominantly it was designed for a fire door to meet the fire regulations, but it's more than that. Okay, it's a bigger product than that, in as much as that any security door that you've got an issue where somebody could inadvertently or deliberately latch the top lock out or throw the top bolt of the top lock out so the door won't close, it's going to be a security breach.
Yeah.
So basically what we've got here is a situation where you've got somebody who's latched the lock out for deliberate reasons, for whatever that might be, or alternatively you've got somebody that inadvertently throws that top lock, which actually means if it is a fire door or a security door, when the door closes it won't latch. The actual square bolt normally would hit on the door frame and it would hold the door open. Yeah. So number one, for fire, obviously fire can go through the door because it's not locked properly, it's not secured, and obviously for security it's not secured if the door's not closed.
So the trick here is really a triple this is your latch.
Correct. Here. So basically what happens here is when I close the door, the latch itself actually retracts. So it's a reversal of a normal type of lock. Yeah. Okay. Whereas a normal type of lock, the latch actually retracts. In this situation, the actual micro switch box latch retracts. So because the square bolt deadlock won't retract in itself, we have to make this retractable. So basically what happens is when the door closes, the square bolt latch hits the latch here, the striker here, they both go in, and then the outside pops out, which actually locks the door. Okay, that will actually hold the door with a deadbolt, correct? But actually holding the inside plunger in, which actually gives it its secure value. So the security actually in this area here is actually monitoring that the bolt of the lock is actually thrown.
And the other key aspect is that is also alarmed. So,
correct. Exactly, it's actually alarmed. So basically what happens is if this actually pulses back to a central security station, which will tell you the door is locked, the door is locked, the door is locked. And of course as soon as somebody unlocks it, it goes the opposite, the door is unlocked. So it sends an alarm back. That's actually done through the security system itself, but this product enables it to work that way. But the real key to this product is literally the way the door closes. So in this situation we've got 2 locks on the door. The top lock is actually thrown, but when I close the door, they both lock. Now that door is actually locked and deadbolted. Okay, yeah. So now with that top lock, it's actually in real life terms, the lock bolt is actually being monitored as we speak, and it's sending a signal back saying yes, the door is locked. In case of somebody wanting to actually open the door, of course they can just literally push the handle down on the inside.
And I'll show you that on the other side.
I'll show you how this works as well. So that's really one part of the product. That product, which is called the AMS 62333, it's an automatic micro switch box. That's only one side of what we're actually discussing here today.